If you were thinking about doing these 3 things in the fall, time out. Don't do it. The first thing you should not do under any circumstances are prune your asparagus tops. Now this might seem like a really obscure thing. You're probably thinking, well, what the heck? This is the most obscure tip Luke's ever given me. But it's actually a huge mistake I see made all the time. Especially when your asparagus is no longer green, starting to turn kind of yellow, maybe yellow into brown, or maybe even brown into dead and dying looking. It's a very common thing where someone just says, I'm gonna chop it off, make my garden look fresh and nice. If you do that, you're making one big mistake, and here's what it is. So asparagus is really, really fluffy, and all that fluffy texture, those leaves, they actually will insulate the soil. When they get weighted down, they get pressed down like this, they have a lot of bounce. It's almost like a little mattress. It's a mattress for things like snow, things like leaves, other material to fall on. And what that does is it actually creates a dome around the roots. And that's really important because asparagus have very deep roots, but those roots are very sensitive to cold. And so what happens is when all this plant material dies back and it kind of mats down like this, it allows for snow to sit on top. And since snow is a very good insulator, and there's air underneath there as well, and air is a wonderful insulator, you have a case where basically this is protecting itself through winter. If you remove all of this, that cold touches the soil right next to the roots, and you have a much higher chance of that plant not surviving. The second thing you should never do under any circumstances are pull out your leafy greens. Greens like this Swiss chard, or even this beautiful arugula, radishes, or even kale. Greens like that are cold hardy, and what makes them amazing in fall and winter is they actually get sweeter. Why is it, you ask? It's because when it comes to leafy greens like this arugula, or any other leafy green for that matter, it's not magic that they get sweeter, it's nature's antifreeze. What I mean by that is all these plants, when they're growing throughout the main growing season, typically will send sugars from the leaves down into the roots. And that usually stops there. But what happens when it gets cold, fall and winter, is it will actually do the reverse. They will actually send the sugars from the roots back up into the leaves as a way to protect itself. Why? Because sugar water freezes at a much colder temperature than regular pure water. And so all of these plants will actually get sweeter over time as the weather gets colder. And that's how they can actually protect themselves from a frost or a freeze well into December and even January with no protection at all. And so leave your greens in the ground, even if they don't grow. Even if they're just growing right now and they seem like they aren't growing at all, trust me, as you eat them throughout the winter, you're gonna thank me for not pulling them out. The third and final thing you should really try to not do, if at all possible, is clean up 100% of your garden. I know, if you're like me, I like looking at a nice clean garden that's ready for spring. It's very aesthetically pleasing. However, there could be a lot of benefits from leaving a few things from the past growing season still in your garden. Things like this sunflower stalk, maybe even some corn stalks, or fall leaves that you haven't raked up and cleaned up yet. What that provides is a home for beneficial insects like ladybugs. Ladybugs are often found in the cracks and crevices of decaying plant material. They actually find that home as a shelter to protect themselves from the winter. And then come spring, they will mate, they'll lay eggs in your garden, and then those eggs are then home to ladybug larvae, which eat things like aphids, and they're very beneficial in the garden. Another thing that these sunflower stalks provide, is food for birds. Birds are so wonderful in the garden. And I know they get a bad rep for picking on things like your peaches or your soft-bodied fruits, but they can be very beneficial for eating things like tomato hornworms as well as cabbage moths. And it's really about that symbiotic relationship that we have with nature, where goldfinches are going to love these sunflower seeds. And yeah, I might have a few volunteer sunflowers, but when have a few volunteer sunflowers ever hurt anybody? I don't think they've hurt a soul, and they're nice to sometimes pop up in the garden. And so I will leave a few in our garden. I'll pull a lot out, but I will leave a few for that food source. And that's another thing too, is that when we're leaving a food source for animals, a lot of people often feel like they're going to be feeding things like squirrels. But that can actually also be a benefit as well. Even though a squirrel is not something that we want in the garden, it can keep them from digging up our garden, which we just did a video on. It's going to keep us from digging up, it's going to keep them from digging up our garlic. are onion sets. In the spring, it's gonna keep them busy and occupied from digging up things like our squash and our pumpkin, as well as corn plants, the little seeds you plant. It's gonna give them a food source that they can kind of stay occupied with. So even for the beneficials and the not so beneficials, leaving something like this sunflower stalk can be really important. And by leaving fall leaves on the ground, it can actually help to do a couple things. One, it's gonna protect the soil. It's actually gonna mulch the soil so the soil is kept warmer longer, and that's gonna help your fruit trees, other perennials. It's also gonna help to suppress weeds on the surface so that in the spring you have to do less work, but it also is, like I said, it's a home for those beneficial insects that live in leaf litter. A lot of caterpillar larvae, as well as, or butterfly larvae, I should say, caterpillars, or things like ladybugs will live in leaf litter, and that is a really great home for them to survive the winter, getting ready for spring. The final thing that leaf litter does is it actually will break down and feed your soil over time. Even if, yes, it does look like a little bit of a mess, if you put it on your beds in the form of a mulch, those leaves that would have otherwise be sent to a landfill or possibly a composting facility, which isn't the worst thing in the world if it was composted, but if it's kept right on site here, it's actually gonna be way less work in the spring, and it's gonna be feeding your soil, so you have to do less work to feed your plants come next season. So those are all the things that I can think of that I really would recommend not doing in the fall. There's not that many things, but I do see these three things being done all the time, and they can actually be working for you, helping you have a better garden, and helping you have more fun in the garden as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. We have lots more gardening content coming out. Before long, we're gonna be in the grow room, we're gonna be in the greenhouse, we're gonna be gearing up for winter, still gardening year round. So stay tuned for that. I hope you guys are gonna enjoy, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care.